a 30-year-old man is due to appear in court this week after he was caught on video stabbing his 26-year-old wife at a campus residence at the CPUT. The incident apparently occurred just this past Saturday. In fact, it was caught on video and made the rounds on social media on Saturday. The suspect was then attacked by students at the residence before police arrived on the scene. Now, this incident also occurred 24 hours after a GBV Awareness campaign took place at the university. Let's unpack the story further. We're joined this morning by Busi Seabe, who is a social justice and gender-based violence activist. Busi, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. I want to kick off our conversation before we get to the specifics of the CPUT incident, talking about the fact that we've had these two incredibly shocking stabbing incidents taking place in just a few days in our country. My co-anchor Ayanda pointing out that it happened in broad daylight, speaking to just the brazenness of both attacks. What do you make of that?
Definitely, and thank you very much for having me this morning. Good morning to everyone. I do believe, the incidents that we have seen in the past couple of days and more incidents that we're going to see in South Africa, unfortunately, as we go into the festive period, are an indication of a sense of lawlessness in the country. And a sense of non-accountability and inaction, not only from, the security forces being the police and private security in universities, particularly related to the CPUT case, but also generally in society and the scourge of GBV in our societies and in our homes as well. What we've seen in the past couple of days is just a reflection of the daily nightmare that young women, children, and men in most instances are living through under the scourge of GBV in South Africa that is not adequately being attended to by policy, government, or other institutions that should be involved, like civil society organizations as well.
I mean, that's shocking, isn't it? And as you reflect on this moment, what happened over these past few days. I'm looking at the front page of The Star this morning, and it's talking about the fact that we have such a dire shortage, not of police officers only, but now also of detectives, more than 8,000 detectives short insofar as our investigative powers in our police go. And when you talk about this lack of consequent management, this is one way where we can pin down why that's happening, right?
Outside of just lack of consequence management, it's also a lack of accountability, a lack of, resource mobilization on gender issues, a lack of action and advocacy as well that is coming through, and we're seeing the effect of it. We're not only just seeing them in universities where we've seen the CPUT, incident, which I must say that, the CPUT incident is a reflection of what's happening in society now. When you look at universities, we must always think of universities as microcosms of society. They're little pockets of society wherein what happens in universities is most likely a reflection of what is happening in society. And the fact that a 35-year-old man, who's not even a student at the institution of higher learning, can walk onto the campus and physically assault his partner or anyone, for that matter, on a university campus without there being, to a large extent, a lot of action or immediate response or resources that are allocated to deal with such situations. We find that this is very prevalent in our society outside of just institutions of higher learning. This is something that is happening in workplaces, in high schools, even in government institutions as well. In Parliament recently, we had members of Parliament complaining about sexual harassment and verbal abuse, and also physical abuse and gender-based violence within the chambers themselves. So this is just a reflection of what our society looks like, and governments, inability to respond immediately, and institutions of higher learning inability also to come up with action plans for implementation that will deal with gender-based violence in institutions of higher learning is a reflection of the crisis that we're in. Women's bodies are constantly under surveillance and are constantly being attacked, and that is the same for children as well in this society. However, we have been seeing also a rise in gender-based violence against men, and this is something that we must be open and honest about speaking about, because gender-based violence is not something that is central or only fixated on women and children, but we're finding in our society today that men are also being brought into the picture. So there's a lot of conversations that need to happen. There's a lot of work that needs to happen. First and foremost, we need to be able to check with the president with regards to what happened to the resolutions from the Gender-Based Violence Summit that has been happening for the past 2-3 years. We are seeing civil society organizations, providing recommendations, and also to a large extent, providing their own services as well, free of charge to society. And they need, government regulation and intervention to cut through the red tape to be able to enter certain sectors of society that need, help the most. But more than anything, I think we should all take a chapter from what UKZN is currently doing at the moment in terms of implementing a compulsory module to deal with racism, to deal with gender-based violence, to deal with gender inequality at a first-year level in order to provide, the advocacy and the resource mobilization and the action plan to deal with gender-based violence in institutions of higher learning. We were finding that in South Africa, institutions of higher learning have become the epicenter for GBV cases, wherein 1 in 5, or to a large extent, they are the top 5, places where gender-based violence incidents are most likely to appear.
Busi, as you're talking, and you're talking about the general lawlessness just across the spectrum in South Africa, and you talk about the presidency's action plan on gender-based violence. When you mentioned the president, what came to mind for me were these reports about the president's plane and the kind of catering that takes place on the president's plane to a cost of tens of thousands of rand. I believe the number was 24,000 rand a head. A lot of the non-perishable items go missing once the plane lands, instead of that going back into stock cupboards, as a way of saving money. This general sort of attitude to resources in our country, corruption at the highest levels, how does that play into, and how does that filter down into the mindset of perpetrators? I don't think that that's a stretch.
It definitely is not. In part of my master's research at Wits University currently, I'm looking at how South Africans are in what we like to call survival mode, and what essentially that survival mode means in terms of resource mobilization and distribution, in terms of economic participation, in terms of social participation as well. And we're finding to a large extent the ripple effect of, inequality from an economic perspective, the ripple effect of inequality from a social economic perspective is one that has motivated to a large extent a lot of the GBV incidents and the lawlessness also to a large extent that we're seeing in the country. And because South Africans are in what we like to call survival mode, criminality does not become a factor that, contributes to their thought process when engaging in activities in the country. So lawlessness becomes a byproduct or a means to an end in order for them to achieve some sort of survival. And this goes back to the economics, right, of the country. This goes back to the state of the economy. This goes back to things as small as, gendering, pay in South Africa, and the different disparities there are, not only in financial contributions in the home, but also the financial differences that there are in society in general. And that's an economic issue that needs to be dealt with by government, right? But to a large extent as well, we also need to hold institutions of higher learning accountable also for the role that they play in the economic mismanagement and confusion that is happening within the country, particularly in institutions of higher learning. But more than anything else, we're seeing GBV and we're seeing lawlessness, and this is something that is going to continue because we don't have a responsive policing force. We don't have a responsive SAPS. We don't even have a courting system that is perpetually on the side of, the victim or the survivor of gender-based violence or any other type of violence. More than anything else, our legal system is more geared on trying to prove the guilty innocent, as opposed to, delivering a fair trial and fair, profitable, resources that are able to help survivors of gender-based violence. And this is some of the issues that we're seeing in our society, and that will persist unless we have a political will and political intervention that will absorb a lot of what we're seeing in our society and change the economic imbalances that we're finding between men and women.
Busi Seabe is a social justice activist. Thanks so much for weighing in on what is an incredibly important story.